Love. We all love to love. To watch people falling in and out of it, to see two people have their lives completely upturned as they fall for someone they wouldn't blink at once if they passed them on the street, all because they dropped a glove or made eye contact at a party. It's the moment where someone realises their true feelings for someone, running to find them in an airport or a New Year's Eve party. It's two strangers who somehow meet and part in a way that can only be explained by fate, perhaps never to see each other again.
Baby, you are gonna miss that plane.
I know.
Or maybe it's a look, a glance across a room, a feeling of longing and pining that can never be explored, loving someone that won't love you back. Or maybe it's in the attempt of trying to love, even if it isn't successful, the act of forgetting and moving on, making yourself open to love again, even when it hasn't worked out before. We love to watch people falling in love, or at least we used to, until the genre disappeared right before our very eyes. In old Hollywood movies, we saw love formed in the most ridiculous, heartwarming and unsuspecting of ways. In films like Bringing Up Baby, It Happened One Night, Singing in the Rain and Brief Encounters, there's such a huge spectrum of intense feeling, from euphoria to heartbreak to resentment and general ridiculousness and tomfoolery. Love was shown through grand sweeping gestures and this heightened sense of joy that made life more colourful and love seem more beautiful. And even though those movies came out decades ago, we've lost that same feeling that was also prevalent in the rom-coms from the 90s and 2000s, like 13 Going on 30, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, 10 Things I Hate About You, and Notting Hill. In recent times, I haven't seen anything that's come close to any of the films we know and love. The current movies about love that are actually good are usually focused on the more heartbreaking and soul-destroying aspects of the experience. People that can't be together even though they love each other, or people that can't openly love the people they love, and people falling out of love with each other. And the romance movies that aren't completely devastating are, in my opinion, not very good, and rooted in something that feels too close to real life, too realistic to come close to the magic and charm of the films from the past.
No, I like you very much, just as you are.
It's no surprise that the framework for forming relationships has shifted, with people finding love in completely different ways to how they did 10, 20 years ago. And with that, I think our attitude to love has also changed. It made me think, how is this reflected in film? And why do romance movies feel so different now? In order to understand what fundamentally feels so different about love in the movies now, we need to look at what used to make these films so great. I think there are four main elements that make up a great romance movie: the music, dialogue, chemistry, and the plot. It sounds pretty basic when you group it together like this, but hear me out. If we look at films like Double Indemnity, Bringing Up Baby, or Notorious, part of what makes their interactions and dynamics so engaging and flirty is the way in which they talk to each other. If we look at this scene from Double Indemnity, what makes their connection feel so electric is because of the fast-paced, witty, and for the time, quite dangerous way of talking about sex without actually talking about it.
45 miles an hour.
How fast was they going, officer?
I'd say around 90.
Suppose you get down off your motorcycle and give me a ticket.
Suppose I let you off with a warning this time.
Suppose it doesn't take.
Suppose I have to whack you over the knuckles.
Suppose I bust out crying and put my head in your shoulder.
Suppose you try putting it on my husband's shoulder.
That tears it.
Because people were less forward about expressing their desires and it was a more taboo thing for people to do, they had to be creative about the way they were flirting because they couldn't be seen to be actually flirting. So everything has this edge to it where it feels thrilling and slightly unacceptable because it wasn't acceptable for them to talk about these things openly. The characters would hide these sexual implications of what they were saying behind wit and riddles, which is completely compelling. When looking at any of the iconic old Hollywood pairings such as Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn or Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, what stands out is the depth of chemistry between them. I don't know whether this is because screen tests were more common back then or maybe because everyone was more sexually repressed so there was more energy, but you can sense this electricity and sense of restraint between them. Again, relating back to the time that these movies were made, perhaps the taboo of being illicit is what creates this tension, as the flirting has to be implied and not overt. Perhaps the chemistry between actors now feels dead because people are less shy about being forward. There aren't the same protocols around dating that would engineer the same kind of chemistry, the kind where you can feel the unspoken words and feelings between the actors because they knew they couldn't act upon them. Maybe the idea of chemistry is dead because people aren't holding anything back anymore. There's no real taboo around just saying how you feel.
I came here tonight because when you realize you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible.
I think what also makes these films feel so magical is the use of music. It heightens and enhances the emotions of the film and allows us to feel joy, making us feel as though love makes our lives feel like a movie. The characters singing to each other allows them to express how they feel in a way they couldn't say out loud. They can revel in the romance of the moment and love openly and without embarrassment. The act of them singing to each other is what conveys their love. Their bursting into song and dance is something that no one else seems to notice. The two of them wrapped up in this private world that only belongs to them. When I look at the most affecting movies from this genre, something that most of them have in common is an original score, which we rarely see with the current movies of this genre. They either use awful copyright-free music or songs that you could just hear on the radio, so it doesn't create any emotions that are unique to that moment, because you have heard it or could hear it anywhere else. In my opinion, we don't need a million needle drops of average songs that don't add anything to the emotional landscape of the film. Just one great song at the perfect moment is fine. When it comes to romance movies, I don't want to see anything that could happen in real life. I want to see people capturing leopards, running from witches, dancing together at a summer camp, falling in love with a movie star, taking part in a bet where you accidentally fall in love with each other. I don't want to see a movie that feels like real life. We believe in the magic of falling in love because of the movies, or at least I do. And part of this magic comes from stories that are so far detached from real life with these stupid quests and situations that we don't relate to, which is why it's magical. But if I see a boring film about two boring people meeting in boring circumstances and then getting together, it obviously doesn't have the same spark. When looking at the romance movies being made now, they don't have the same feeling as they used to because they don't hold up in any four of these key areas. The chemistry feels flat, there's not the same wit and charm to the dialogue style, with countless poppy needle drops that aren't unique to the film, and a distinctly average plot that is stubbornly grounded in realism. Like I said earlier, love is now formed in completely different ways. We have online dating, fuckboys, and Instagram, and the framework for forming relationships has completely changed. And I think that Hollywood is kind of confused by this, because in other parts of the film industry we're asking for more representation of our real-life experiences on screen. And perhaps they think we want the same thing from romance movies. And maybe that's why these films don't feel the same anymore. I think Hollywood is trying to create stories that are more realistic and relatable to our generation's experiences of love and dating. But what if we don't want to see this on screen? And what if this is what killed the romance genre? In order to understand this better, I think we need to look at what changed our attitude towards love in the first place. And I think this can be traced back to one event in particular, something that then redefined the romance genre that we know and love: the 2007 financial crash. Let me talk vague economics for a minute. So after the crash, I think we started to think about love in a more logical and practical and algorithmic way, because we realised that in order to survive under capitalism, we need to be able to support ourselves, and sometimes that's easier with a partner because you can share bills and rent and all that kind of stuff. And because people were living in a time of scarcity, I think that was naturally reflected in what people were looking for in love and relationships, because they had to overcompensate in some other areas. I think that love is kind of creative. I don't really know how to expand on that, but to me, love and creativity are on a similar wavelength in our brain. And capitalism suppresses creativity because it's an outlet to express emotion, which breaches ideas close to capitalism about privacy and not expressing our thoughts and emotions openly. And I think that seeps into our relationships as well. We're maybe less likely to be big and expressive in how we share love and feelings because it's seen as a more private thing. And I think that also affects the way we love. So capitalism has ruined love in the sense that money has to come into it. In a recession, money factors into everything, even simple things like choosing something to do, where to go for dinner. You almost have to date within your means. In that way, all connections are kind of classist, because you're forced to commodify yourself under capitalism, and money has to play into our relationships and the ways that we look for love. Because we've commercialised and flattened romantic experiences by reducing them to lists, photos and figures, it's no surprise that people find it harder to create intimacy and find a romantic partner in the first place. This scarcity mindset in regards to the economy is mirrored in the way we treat people and our search for love. We're more terrified of being alone, and because of that, many people are more likely to be in a bad relationship than to be single. We try to fit our partners into boxes that suit our needs, finding escapism in another person and calling that romance, all stemming from this inability to be alone and the idea that people are somewhat disposable. These shifts in the economy are also where we're creating new ways of finding romantic fulfillment, like the emergence of the situationship. The situationship stems from the same fear of intimacy and the idea that people are disposable, which creates a reluctance to commit to a partner. You can be half in and half out, and by naming it, we've kind of validated it and made it a socially acceptable form of love. We've tricked ourselves into thinking that having scraps of romance and being somewhat fulfilled is okay, because at least we have something. Love is becoming increasingly blurred and defined because people aren't looking for a connection that challenges them. We approach love algorithmically and want someone that affirms who we are and negates our loneliness within the machine of late-stage capitalism. This approach to love is rooted in desperation and fear of not finding what we've seen on the screen, and so we settle for these half-baked ideas of romance and call it a day. Because if they're over 6 foot or know how to cook, then I guess it's fine, right? And of course, we can see this reflected in the types of romance movies that were released after 2007. When we look at the romance movies that were released after the financial crash, they fall into one of two categories. Good movies with a cynical attitude towards love, or bad movies that are trying to be relatable to our generation's new ways of dating, passing as being positive. The good movies with a cynical attitude towards love show the devastating, soul-crushing, awful experiences where people either find someone perfect but it doesn't work out, or they can't be with someone they love due to circumstances outside of their control, or it exposes an aspect of love that is so twisted that we never want to love again. Because situationships and pining and longing have become a core part of our romantic experiences, this is naturally reflected in the movies, showing these harsh and devastating relationships that quite frankly don't stand a chance. The only alternative perspective we see of love in the movies now are the quote-unquote positive experiences, the films that pass as being optimistic and do so by replicating modern experiences. And this is where I think that this all goes very wrong. Hollywood thinks that we want realism from the romance genre, to see this new framework of dating in the movies and to relate to what we watch, with anonymity commonly being a prerequisite for intimacy. But most people I know that are within the same age group as me are embarrassed about the new ways that we date and find love. I think a lot of people wish that we could meet people organically, that we could have the stories our parents do about meeting people in bookshops and bars. People are embarrassed about meeting their partners on Hinge. Think about all the couples that lie and say that they met through a mutual friend. By making romance movies relatable, we've killed what made the genre special. That's why they feel so sad and different now. We watch these films to live through the screen and experience our lives as a movie. If we see our real experiences with love on the screen, we're reminded of how we aren't even pretending that this kind of love is possible. We can't even have fantasies. The whole point is to see something magical and unrealistic because it will make you feel hopeful and strive for something that isn't possible. Maybe the experiences we saw on screen in the past were never relatable, but that they were there to give us something to be hopeful for, or maybe they were just a distraction from the fact that the love we think exists, the love we see in the movies, doesn't exist at all. And maybe we were never supposed to relate to them. Maybe the genre is supposed to be a form of escapism, a world where we can fantasize about being treated kindly, about men being nice to us. It was never supposed to be real, it was just supposed to be silly and hopeful, to make you think that it's possible to be swept off your feet and meet someone in a way that feels magical, exciting, and like the world is a better place than it really is. I would argue that romance movies are a form of escapism. The genre is as fantastical as Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings. I would argue that rom-coms are to women what action movies are to men, a genre completely founded on escapism and fantasy. The only difference being, men aren't mocked for liking action movies. By making the stories we see on screen relatable, we've abandoned any hope that we might have had, and we've admitted that it isn't possible. What we can hope for is an endless talking stage after an awful Hinge date that eventually leads to some pathetic relationship that's based on nothing other than just giving up because someone is so incessantly and annoyingly pervasive in your life. This is the new standard for romance. It's nothing new that love and romance are two separate things, and I'm not sure if both are possible at the same time. But I think the old movies from the genre were a distraction from that very truth. It was there to make us think that love and romance under capitalism is possible. Love is, of course, possible, but romance is what I think is the lie. Love is, and perhaps should be, boring in every sense of the word and verb. To me, the perfect metaphor for this is the smoking scene at the party in The Worst Person in the World. If you can find someone you like so much that you can sniff their armpit, watch them pee and blow smoke into their mouth and do all these gross things with, but still like them, maybe love is as boring as just finding someone whose armpit you'd willingly sniff. I think we should be allowed to dream, to be delusional about what we'd like from our future. We talk so much about the idea of living our lives like movies that apparently the only area we can't do this is in our love lives. And why can't we just have nice things and silly fantasies? Maybe we can only have the love we want if we think it's possible, and right now we're not even allowed to see this on screen. So I say, let's bring back goofing around in the movies, bring back ridiculous plots with leopards, bets, bridges, original scores for rom-coms with grand gestures, people bursting into song and heightened everything. Why don't we just carry on ignoring the reality of love for a little longer? And there's no better place to do this than in the movies.